And member, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, allow me to start by reassuring the population that there is absolutely nothing that would be unconstitutional with the bill that is before this House once it is passed with the special majority that is being requested. The mover, the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, who piloted this bill, made a very strong case and an impassioned plea to all of us, to the 41 of us here today, to take our responsibility and our duty to country very seriously. The member for Diego Martin West made the strong arguments as to why this type of legislation is necessary by giving examples of types of corruption that we've faced. The members on the other side, I've listened to them very carefully, so far have not given any satisfactory reason as to why this bill and the whole principle behind a bill such as this should not be supported. They fluttered with certain suggestions as to unconstitutionality. That is easily defeated. The bill requires a special majority. The section of the Constitution that will then determine whether it is proportional and whether it is satisfied by just the passage of a special majority is Section 13 of the Constitution, as we're all aware. But seeing that the previous speaker dabbled, as he does, in law, I think it is necessary just to assure the population and to assure the other 40 members of this House here today that with the passage of this legislation, it will, with a special majority, there will be no successful challenge in court. Because you see, this bill fits directly within Section 13(1) of the Constitution, which says an act to which a section applies may expressly declare that it shall have effect, even though it's inconsistent with Sections 4 and 5, which is what we're dealing with. If such an act does so declare, it shall have effect accordingly, unless the act is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in a society that has a proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual. And that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a legal test. We heard the Prime Minister stand here and say over 50 other countries in the world have similar legislation and provisions. So immediately that dismisses the argument, once you pass this with a special majority, that it is not reasonably justifiable in our society. It is. To now lay a bit of foundation before responding to some of the suggestions made by other speakers, I think it is necessary to understand, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what this piece of legislation is seeking to achieve and why whistleblowing legislation is justifiable and why it is necessary in a democratic society. This legislation, or any whistleblowing legislation, requires a number of ingredients. The first is the identification of protection of anyone who wants to provide information under whistleblowing. The second, in my respectful submission, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we know previous speakers touched on it, and I will come to it, is that anyone who falsely uses the provisions is then susceptible to liability. In other words, I've heard some of the speakers previously flutter about and say that if someone, all it needs is someone to give false information, whistleblowing information, and you lead you down a rabbit hole, what you have to provide for is that if that is done, there are consequences and there are liability, and this covers it. Just to remind the population, as the person who piloted the bill did, why this type of legislation is necessary. In the fight against corruption, very often the evidence or the information that then allows someone to build a case comes from a whistleblower. And to give some live examples, You heard the previous speaker, and in fact, the member for Diego Martin West, give a number of examples as to instances that this government faced when we came into office in 2015 of elements of corruption that had to be combated and how they were successfully dealt with. Whistleblowers assist in that exercise. For example, to remind the population, on the Sunday night, a Sunday night before a general election on a Monday morning, and the Sunday night into the Monday morning, prime parcels of land in the Western Peninsula of Trinidad were being given away. I want to repeat that. I stood in the previous parliament and gave this information on a previous occasion when we were down at the waterfront. At Chagaramas, in the Chagaramas Development Authority, in 2015, on the Sunday night into Monday morning of an election, prize parcels of land were being given away by the strokes of pens. Deeds being given away at gross undervalues, parcels of land that shouldn't have been granted, etc. And it was a whistleblower that provided the information that then allowed this government to go in there and to do what was necessary. I recall Minister Imbert and myself were tasked with the responsibility. We did what we could. Fortunately, some of the persons were willing to work with the government, and we did what needed to be done to protect the taxpayers. But it is those types of instances where you provide the whistleblowing information. I also want to put on record, whistleblowing they're already in private sector. A lot of institutions that provide very satisfactory procedures for whistleblowers, and I'll come to that again in a short while. So in the pursuit of corruption, one of the elements that assists in fighting corruption is whistleblowing. We also had, under this administration, under the PNM administration since 2015, a number of other instances of arrangements, contractual arrangements that were entered into, that persons provided information that allowed us to protect the taxpayers. And it is necessary to then protect those persons from any victimization or any ill effects that may be dealt to them. There was one that we really haven't spoken about openly as yet, but the time will come. But the population was told at the time when we commissioned Justice Nelson to go in and to take a look at, and that is the kiosks at the airport. And we asked Justice Nelson to look at the whole procurement surrounding that. Again, information is provided that assisted in that and allows a government to take certain positions and to fight arrangements on behalf of the taxpayers. One that I was surprised not to hear about today, but I will raise it, and I'm a little disappointed that certain members on the other side aren't here. We have been bombarded consistently about CCTV cameras. We sat here and we listened. We went and we procured new CCTV camera system for the nation. And I want to say now, because I see it continuously being repeated on the other side, that the camera system that exists isn't working. Over 85 to 90% of that existing camera system is working. It is working. The others are too out of date, but that has been fixed. But with the CCTV system, we have managed to save over $300 million a year on that system. But yet still, you still have persons coming here and attacking it and attacking it. Again, the reason we were able to succeed in a successful procurement and finally an implementation via contract of a new system that hopefully will come on in the not too distant future is because we had whistleblowers in the system who warned us about certain things that were taking place, who warned about certain persons who were trying to scuttle the exercise. And you see, I also heard a previous speaker talk about how in Canada it's only for the private sector. But it is equally important, in Canada it's only for the public sector. Yes, but it is equally important to provide for it for the private sector as well. And I'll give a couple instances where I personally, this is prior to entering politics in 2015, was retained by private sector companies as a result of their whistleblowing procedures and policies that existed. Despite what you've heard from those on the other side, it is not difficult to set up. A private sector company, I've heard them say, well, how could you have an employee complaining to an employer about something the employer might have done? It is simple. And I personally participated in those instances before. You just retain outside persons. So some of the largest companies in Trinidad, some are multinationals, have their systems. You can anonymously go and complain about something. You can complain about sexual harassment, victimization, etc. You can blow the whistle on, I think a corrupt contract is about to be awarded. And all the private entity or even the public sector does is set up a process. And that is what this legislation is about. It's about protecting a process and a procedure. And it then allows you to retain someone from outside, someone independent, to come in and do an investigation. I did several of them in my lifetime. And then you provide that information now to the proper person in the organization for them to action thereafter. So this, I've heard the continued attempts by the speakers on the other side try to water down the legislation, to attack it. I heard one speaker say, nowhere in the Commonwealth, tell us where this legislation came from. Where this legislation came from, it was not a blanket copying of any single piece of legislation. It initiated, and the genesis of this bill is from Malta, from Malaysia, from Jamaica, and other provisions. We are not reinventing the wheel here whatsoever. You also heard an attempt by the member for Oropouche East to throw out certain instances with a suggestion that, look what's going on at Central Block. That is, a whistleblower gave us that, fine. But I want to assure the population of Trinidad and Tobago, I heard the member for Lavantil West start down the road, he didn't complete it. There has been no allegation of corruption in the termination of that contract, compared to allegations of corruption as to why on a Friday before a general election, a public servant, obviously on instructions, completely annihilates and deletes a clause in the OAS contract that allowed the government to terminate the contract and call on the bonds for bankruptcy that was taking place since March of that year. So the previous government sat down from March, April, May, June, July, August, into September, did nothing about the termination of that OAS contract on a clause that it could have terminated it, which was bankruptcy, but took it out on the Friday before the election. And then we had to fight for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, an unnecessary fight, but successful, thankfully, to recover the bonds. The whistleblowing on the Central Block is nothing more than a smoke screen, because it is a termination by a contractor in a dispute with the employer over certain things on the site. No allegation of corruption there. There was discussion and mention of Mosquito Creek and materials from Tobago. Again, complete rubbish. There has been absolutely, and we'll hear more about it at the appropriate time, but no suggestion with respect to corruption. How could it be corrupt to take state rock from Tobago, from Studley Park, and use it in our own waters? Why should we import that? Why should we use very scarce and needed foreign exchange to buy rock when we have the rock here, right there in Tobago? I heard a ruse again about the qualifications of a whistleblowing officer. Who will be the whistleblowing officer? Put in the legislation. There's a need in the legislation to say what are the... You don't need any qualifications to be the officer who someone presents information that they want investigated to. So again, to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that again is a complete smoke screen by those on the other side. And I'd like through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because unfortunately enough attention hasn't been paid to it previously. What is the type of detrimental action? This bill defines detrimental action. And that is the type of information that you want people to come and talk that you don't want people to face. Detrimental action means any act or omission that results in a person being A, unfairly subject to disciplinary action, B, demoted, harassed, C, harassed, intimidated, or victimized, D, transferred against his will, E, unfairly refused transfer or promotion, F, subject to a term or condition of employment or retirement from his employment that's altered to his disadvantage. And it goes on all the way to K, identifying this is what we're protecting whistleblowers against. So in other words, we have identified from A to K a number of particulars that you should not be subjected to if you are going to be a whistleblower. Again, I heard it suggested by previous speakers on the other side, just amend the Industrial Relations Act. Or why can't you go under the Industrial Relations Act to the union? You can. If you're being victimized, you can, but this is making it easier. So yes, now you can go to the industrial court and you can say, I'm being victimized because I was a whistleblower and I said something about my employer or another employee who is senior to me. There's nothing that prevents that. So therefore, what is the problem with having a specific piece of legislation to protect instances outside of an industrial court? Because what the speakers on the other side didn't say, that only allows a certain category of persons. Is the Industrial Relations Act only allows a certain number of persons, a limited number, a worker as defined, to be able to access the industrial court. And that's what they're not telling you. What you have for the first time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a specific piece of legislation designed to, 1, promote whistleblowing, to 2, protect persons who are going to be whistleblowers, and 3, Madam Speaker, to protect persons against false reports by whistleblowers. I also wanted to use the opportunity to tell the population that this act now defines what improper conduct is. And this is the type of conduct that this bill is specifically designed to combat. Improper conduct means any criminal offense, any failure to carry out a legal obligation, any conduct that is likely to result in a miscarriage of justice, conduct that is likely to threaten the health or safety of a person. Immediately on those 4 items, you can see why you want to protect a whistleblower. Let a whistleblower come forward and give the information prior to the conduct of a criminal offense or after, so we can successfully prosecute, we can successfully investigate whilst the whistleblower is being protected. It goes on, conduct that shows gross mismanagement, impropriety, or misconduct in carrying out of any activity that involves the use of public funds. Surely that would redound to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the taxpayers and the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Wouldn't we want to know why a particular officer in the office of the Prime Minister had millions of dollars going through his account and where that money went to? Wouldn't we want to know the answer to those things as law-abiding citizens and taxpayers? And allow some whistleblower who is aware of it, who is part of the cog in the wheel of corruption, to come forward and say, listen, this is what went on at EMBD at a particular point in time, when $400 million were being distributed amongst a few in a cartel collusion, and one person, the engineer or whoever it is, come forward and be protected and be able to provide that information. Even at the time, it might have been able to prevent the wastage of taxpayers' money in the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. So what we're trying to do now is institutionalize, and I heard previous speakers say, a mandate that was given to a PNM government in 2015, a mandate to bring legislation to allow a pillar to fight corruption which is to allow the protection of whistleblowers. This bill goes on very carefully and very properly to provide legislatively the means to achieve these things. Madam Speaker, I see you indicating. How much more time do I have?
10 seconds.
Sorry, how much?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. So, Madam Speaker, I did not get the opportunity to discuss a few things that I had intended to, but I'm sure the other speakers will do so. And I thank you once again for the opportunity to have contributed on such an important piece of bill and such an important piece of legislation. And I'd like to conclude, Madam Speaker, by again making the call to all of the members, the 41 members that are here, to vote in support of this essential piece of legislation. Thank you.
Member for Superior.